Welcome to Real Common Treatable, where we help behavioral health professionals stay at the forefront of adolescent mental health, substance use, and addiction treatment. My name is Clint Malley, and today we are talking about yoga therapy. Not just yoga and not therapy, but yoga therapy and the combination of what happens when we combine those two essential things for someone's well-being. And my guest today is Katie Pine. So first off, Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Katie, for those of us who don't know anything about yoga therapy, can you tell us about how you got into yoga therapy and maybe what is yoga therapy?
Absolutely. Well, I found yoga over 10 years ago on my transition actually from high school to college. So I was moving out of my hometown for the first time. I felt super lost, super adrift and ungrounded. And I remember some of the first friends that I made in college took me to yoga with them. And that became a really supportive practice for me for the entirety of my college experience. And it was really the only time that I felt connected to myself and calm and like there weren't a million things going on at once for me. So that was really supportive. And I became a yoga teacher while I was in college. I just felt really drawn to sharing it with other people. And over time, started teaching more and more of the slower, like more introspective kinds of yoga because there are so many different kinds of yoga and we don't teach them all out here in the West. So my personal practice and my teaching practice sort of evolved over time to be more introspective, slower, like restorative and yin yoga, more meditative practices, mindfulness practices, and things like that. And I took a trauma informed training back in 2017 that was part of a yoga therapy program. And that is where I learned about yoga therapy, which has been a thing in the East for thousands of years, and it's newer in our Western cultures. And it really blends yoga and yogic tools and practices well beyond the physical, things like breath work, mindfulness practices, awareness practices, lifestyle routine, and things like that, with a therapeutic setting like you established in talk therapy here in the West. So we do one on one work in yoga therapy primarily, some small group work, but it's different from going to a yoga class in a group setting because you do an intake process, you do one on one assessment, you do goal setting, and then we build you a treatment plan that moves you toward those goals and integrates into your life basic yogic tools that are really supportive. So I found yoga at a time in my life where I really needed support. And now I'm able to share it with other people and to be able to share firsthand experience about practices that help you feel balanced and at home in your body and connected to your lived experience again. So that has been wonderful. And that was kind of my journey. And now I share it with others.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a really interesting journey and like how you kind of stumbled upon it through trauma informed care. And now, this audience is mostly geared towards adolescent behavioral health professionals. So people who are working with teens, right? And I actually have some experience of doing yoga with teens because when I was a middle school teacher, I was like, all right, I had a really small class. It was like 6 or 8 kids. And I was like, there's no reason why we can't be doing yoga as part of our daily routine. So we're in the group, I dim the lights, we have the music, I've got my down dog app or whatever. I'm trying to like walk them through some stuff. And I realized that it is actually much harder to get middle schoolers to do. I thought they would just like embrace it, that they would like just be cheering me like for doing something so amazing. But it was actually really hard for them, right? Because like obviously you're in middle school, like you feel awkward. If there's anything that feels like kind of like sexually suggestive, like a cat cow, then you're like, oh no, like what do I do? This is weird. And so all of those things made it a crash and burn situation. And so when we're thinking about teens, right, adolescents, what are the specific benefits of working with teens in yoga? And what are the things that people need to be aware of when working with teens using yoga therapy?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, so I have some experience working with teens in a therapeutic setting and specifically with adolescents and adults in addiction recovery settings. And I totally know what you mean. Initially, there's some resistance, there's some like awkwardness with teens in group settings. And I have found that if you're using like a therapeutic, trauma informed approach with them and you're not basing the class solely on the poses, it actually goes a little bit differently because that's how most of us are introduced to yoga in the West as pose based. And yoga, and especially yoga therapy, it's so much more than that. It's all about how do things feel in your body, getting you more connected to the present moment, being able to process emotions in a healthy way, and to identify what you're experiencing more fully. So, especially when you're an adolescent, when you're a teenager, a lot of emotions, a lot of hormones, a lot of new experiences are going on for you, and that can be super overwhelming. So, therapeutic yoga, step one is getting you more familiar and comfortable with the full range of your experience, right? So, we learn to identify how does something feel physically, what's going on emotionally and mentally at the same time. And you're able to teach teens that they're not just how their body feels, or they're not just that thought that they're having, or that overwhelming emotion that they're having, that all of it is integrated. But at the root of that, there's something more stable and more connected. And that's what yoga thinks, right? It believes that there's this place in us that everybody has, that you're inherently born with, that is connected and perfect and whole and complete. And we're moving you back toward that. So I have found with teens and adults equally, if you are gently guiding them toward that, and maybe that's through a breath practice, maybe it's through gentle movement, but movement with inquiry based. What does this feel like for you in your body? Does this part of the body feel tight or loose today? How's that going? Checking in, and then supporting with things like breath work, awareness practices, visualizations. Kids love it over time. And I also like the way you're talking about setting up the space, like low lights, introspective. You don't have to be looking at one another. Like that's really helpful, is to kind of get them out of that socialized setting where like everybody's kind of looking at each other all the time, and into like, let's scan through the body and see how this feels. Let's use this tool and like see how you feel afterwards. Nobody's looking at you during this hour. That's huge for teens as well. So getting them into the body and able to process feelings and emotions in a more of a healthy way is huge. There are a lot of benefits overall, though. It helps decrease stress and anxiety. There's all this research that this is our most stressed out generation of teens that we've ever had. And people need tools, especially at the teenage level, to meet those feelings, right? So there are yoga based tools and techniques that you can use when you're able to identify, I'm feeling anxious today. This is making me feel stressed out. This is going on for me mentally or physically. And that's been huge with the adolescent community. And then the other piece I would say is that yoga therapy is really helpful for improving sleep. And there's like never a more important time of your life to get enough and restful sleep than when you're growing and when you're in your teen and your adolescent years. So things like yoga therapy routines for the evening and adjustments for how you downregulate the nervous system before bed has been huge. So that's just like a little piece of how you can use yoga therapy and therapeutic techniques with the teenage population in a way that starts to feel more and more supportive for them.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy, it's really like a toolkit, right? It's like, hey, okay, like I know that I'm going to feel, anxious or frustrated or sad. Like, what are the tools that I can draw upon to be able to self-regulate, to be able to bring myself back down to like a stable equilibrium, to a place where I can make an informed or a calm decision, right? And it makes sense that yoga therapy is like a tool. It's a tool that you can have in your tool belt. And I want us to paint the picture just a little more specifically when it comes to the difference between yoga and yoga therapy, and also yoga therapy's place within therapy itself, right? Is it supposed to be a replacement? Is it supposed to be something you do in supplement or in conjunction with therapy? So, first let's break this down. What's the difference between yoga and yoga therapy?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people in our society have experience with like a group yoga class that's mostly physical poses, some breathing connected. That's just one piece of the whole picture of yoga. So yoga therapy gets even more into the Eastern roots of the practice and shares a lot more individualized treatment, right? So you can do yoga in a group setting if everybody has a similar experience really easily. Like in a treatment setting, everybody is struggling with some aspect of addiction, and that can be the basis for which you share yoga tools. Or yoga for first responders is really helpful if people have a similar background of like traumatic experience and things like that. You can do yoga therapy in group settings like that. But otherwise, a lot of yoga therapy is done in a one on one setting. So people are coming to a yoga therapist with specific goals in mind. They share their lived experience, past physical, mental, emotional experiences that you've had. And then we will tailor, maybe it's physical practices, maybe it's breath practices, maybe it's lifestyle changes, maybe it's gentle somatic movement to release things from the body. Maybe it's awareness based practices on like, what does it feel like to experience a trigger or emotion in my body? And then how do I down regulate from there? We'll cater all of that to you specifically. So it's a lot more individualized. It's personalized treatment planning in yoga therapy as opposed to like a group yoga setting. And it gets you beyond just the physical poses. So it's not about how flexible is my body. And that's usually what people think of here in the West when they think of yoga. And that has to do with how we've marketed it here. But there's so much more to the yoga practice. And the yogic philosophy is that everybody is capable of healing and wellness and feeling good and moving through the challenges of life with these tools to support them. So that's why it's really great to share. And that's why it can meet you where you're at, even if you don't have yoga experience. Yoga therapy can be really supportive because it doesn't matter if you've never done a pose before, that might have nothing to do with our treatment. So yeah, and then our training for yoga therapy is super specialized and pretty intensive. So most yoga teachers go through like a 200-hour training, and then you're able to teach in a studio. And that can just be an intensive for like a month. It can be over a couple of months. Those trainings are all different. Yoga therapy is another between 3 to 6 years of specialized training once you're already a yoga teacher. So you move from a 200-hour to a 500-hour teacher, then into 1,000 hours of training. So it takes additional several years, and we specialize our study in like yoga for grief, yoga for mood disorders, anxiety and depression. What would you do? Yoga for cancer, yoga for addiction, like yoga for recovery is a big part of the training. And we learn what we want to specialize in as practitioners ourselves, but also just the wide variety of things that yoga can help support and address. So that is how we can kind of differentiate yoga from yoga therapy. And it's really taking off in this part of the world. Now we have a governing body, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, oversees all of those trainings and who can be certified as a yoga therapist. So if you see a C-IAYT in front of any of our names, that means you are a certified yoga therapist with that 1,000-hour training from an accredited school that the International Association of Yoga Therapists oversees. So that's a little bit of just background on that I like to share. And then in terms of yoga in therapy, that's a great question, because we believe that yoga therapy and talk therapy, physical therapy, massage therapy, healing modalities in general all belong together. We think that it's not one size fits all what people need in terms of their treatments. And it's also not necessarily always going to be long lasting in a supportive way for people if they are only addressing perhaps the mental aspect of what they've been going through or just the physical aspect of what they've been going through. And yoga therapy, our treatment plans and our assessments and the way that we look at our clients is super holistic. We're looking at you on every level of your being, not just physically, not just mentally. And we also think that talk therapy, things like one-on-one individualized physical therapy if you're recovering from an injury or things like that, dietitian work, super helpful. And we would recommend that people go see everybody if possible. And like that's the dream. It's like holistic collectives here in the West where you can get all of those needs met by practitioners at once, and those practitioners can like share their findings with each other to help support you. Because a lot of times here in the West, we're finding like a little band-aid put over an injury or a problem or an emotional situation, as opposed to kind of getting to the root or the symptoms of an experience that somebody is having. So yoga therapy in addiction recovery, for example, is being woven into like DBT or CBT or the talk therapy that they're doing with clinicians. And it's a great complement to I'm experiencing a trigger in my talk therapy. What does that feel like in my body? What is a breath practice or an awareness practice or a mindfulness technique that I can do to regulate my nervous system? Because so much of what yoga therapy is doing is actually re-regulating the nervous system, like you were talking about.
It's really interesting the way that you kind of differentiate the yoga from the West and the way that yoga maybe was traditionally practiced. And it seems like one of the distinctions that you are making is that hey, it's not you're not necessarily trying to get a workout, right? Like the measures of success with yoga therapy has nothing to do with the amount of calories that you burned. Is that accurate?
100%. Yes. And I have a teacher of mine from my training that I love that she says yoga is not a workout, it's a work in. And we have sold it in the West as a workout, right? And that really just misses a lot of the philosophy behind it, the intentionality behind it. It's a whole lifestyle and like way of showing up in the world and connecting with other people and reconnecting to yourself if you're using the full scope of what yoga really is. And that is something that's really exciting to be able to have been trained in from teachers in India and to be able to share here because you're only getting a tiny fraction of what yoga really is in a lot of our studio based classes. And it makes you feel good. It gets you into your body. It helps people breathe more fully, which is huge, but it's not the full picture.
And the second part about what you're saying that I think I really want to make sure that we're clear on. So, when would be a good time for a traditional like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapist or, a primary therapist? When would be a good time for them to reach out to someone who does yoga therapy? And then when would be a good time for a yoga therapist to like reach out or to refer out to a traditional talk therapist? Are there any things that you're like, yo, I think that you need some more of this work, right? Maybe less of this yoga therapy, and I recommend you do this. Or have you seen anything like that?
I have, yeah. And we have a really specifically defined scope of practice as yoga therapists that we are really careful to stay inside. I share with all of my clients up front, like, this is the kind of things that we can address together. And if we spill into any of this territory, I would happily refer you out to a talk therapist, a dietitian in particular, because the nutrition piece is so big in how we feel. And that's not something that I do. And that's really helpful. And clients like that. People want to be told the truth and they want to be supported and they want to know what can you do with me and what can you not do with me. And we don't do everything. So I have situations where I've got a network of other practitioners that I trust that I can send clients to. And if somebody is coming to me for something that they really need to process on a more like CBT, DBT scale, like you're saying, or they have a primary situation that they would like to talk through and get practical therapeutic recommendations from a licensed therapist, I'll refer them out to them. And what I can do with them in the meantime, or even in just one session, if I'm sending them elsewhere, is help them get kind of reconnected to their body. What does it feel like to be in your body? And what are maybe some supportive breathing techniques that you can use in a moment when you feel overwhelmed or triggered, right? So that is a way that the practices of therapy and yoga therapy can complement each other. What are you talking through? What does it feel like in your body? Here's a breath practice, a mindfulness practice, a hand practice that you can use that directly relates to what's going on in your brain that can help you feel more grounded and more balanced. And then on the flip side of that, if you're in talk therapy and there's a piece that's just like feels stuck, or if the talk therapist isn't trained in somatic work and the client is having like physical pain that is going along with whatever they're in session for, or distress in terms of sleep and things like that, or lifestyle management, yoga therapy is a great complementary modality for them to move into, right? Where they can talk out with somebody what is going on for them. They can do a lot of their own processing there. And then they can come see me and we can make you a lifestyle management plan. Maybe it's a morning practice. Maybe it's an evening routine so you can sleep. Maybe it's a better work life balance that's got yoga practices kind of built into your daily routine if you're working from home or something like that. And over time, you're really able to create new baselines of like healing and ease in your nervous system with the body practices that you can't always get just by talking through something.
You kind of led into this next question, and it's about, when we think about working out, we're like, okay, you need to have rest, right? But yoga, as you talked about, is not necessarily a workout. It's more of a restorative practice, right? It's something that you do. It's a work in. That's what you said, right? It makes sense. I love that. It's so much better. So, is it okay to do yoga therapy or yoga every day?
It is, yes. And that's a great question as well, because it's not to say that we're not doing physical practices with the clients that want and need them, right? So I have a lot of clients with particular pain issues, maybe chronic pain, and they'll come to me, and you can use pieces of the physical yoga practice to stretch and open parts of the body that are chronically tight and causing pain, and to strengthen other parts of the body that are chronically weak and contributing to that pain. So that's huge. But a yoga therapist will assess you in a one on one setting and see what your physical anatomy is like and what those poses might look like in your body, and give you that personalized instruction on how to do them safely and how to do them in a way that's servicing the goals that you're working towards. So it can be a physical practice if you'd like it to. It's just that's only one piece of what we're doing. The physical part and getting things moving in the body, opening the parts of the body that are tight where we think energy gets stuck, and the strengthening the parts of the body that are weak that might be contributing to pain or like poor lifestyle posture and habits that we don't even know we have, is a big piece of it. But what I would say is, like with any kind of, if you're doing a physical practice, yoga really does emphasize that balance. How can we create rest and like down regulation for the nervous system and encourage repair in the body just as much as we're putting stress on the body if we're doing a workout class or hiking or like complementary like physical modalities that people do. I have a lot of clients that come to me for one-on-one work to make sure that they can keep cycling or skiing or swimming or doing the things that they love that are really physical without injury, or to rehab after an injury has subsided. So the practices that we put in place for you are meant to become new lifestyle changes, right? Maybe it's just awareness around what you're feeling. Maybe it's supportive routines to bookend your day. It's breathing more fully and more completely in the body, the lungs, the diaphragm, which most of us are not, which contributes to how we're feeling. So practices of yoga therapy become a lifestyle, right? And they build up over time, and they can be really supportive. And the physical piece can be in there as much or as little as you'd like.
Okay, so this is a tangential question, but is someone a yogi if they practice yogi or yoga? Is someone a yogi if they practice yoga, or is someone a yogi if they teach yoga?
Oh, that's a great question. Somebody is a yogi if they are attempting to live their life in accordance with yogic principles. And that just goes so much beyond of if you have a physical practice or not. And you definitely don't have to be a yoga teacher to be a yogi. There are a lot of Eastern teachers that say that over time, if you're living your life in accordance with the lifestyle that yoga purports and doing your own internal work, then you just start showing up in the world differently. And it's no longer necessary to even say, I am a yogi. It's like you wouldn't be like, I'm alive. Like it just is, right? It's just how you choose to be in the world.
The people who watch and listen to this, they're all about these numbers, right? Like they're the people who they want to understand some sort of data behind it, right? And so when we think about the theory of yoga therapy, like how do we know yoga therapy is effective? Like are there any objective markers that we see? Like I think that there's been plenty of research that's been done like, yoga is like a good thing for you generally, right? It helps to like make you feel better. But if you were to say, what's the theory of yoga therapy and how it actually helps somebody, how would you explain it, maybe to a 5-year-old in a simple way that they could understand?
Sure. So yeah, there's a ton of research coming out, not just about yoga therapy, but as a yoga, about yoga as a whole, rather. Um, and how it supports changing the brain structure. So if if you think about it in terms of the way that we live in our society creates a lot of stress in our bodies and our brain, it changes the composition of the brain over time. And they study this extensively in addiction recovery, right? If you are displaying addiction behavior, what's going on in your brain when you experience a trigger, when you've got a craving, and then when you use substances. And yoga has been found over and over again in all of these studies to decrease the centers of the brain that get bigger if you're too stressed out over time. It makes those centers smaller, and it increases the centers of the brain that are associated with effective decision making and like controlling our impulses and emotional regulation and things like that. So that is just a very clear way that the science supports the effectiveness of yoga. There's also a lot of study that's been done by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration on specifically how does yoga help with addiction recovery, because that's been huge in the past couple of years. And they're just finding that in conjunction with other forms of clinical treatment, like we've talked about, in conjunction with talk therapy and those cognitive practices and things like EMDR and like practices that licensed talk therapists are doing. Holistic practices like yoga, like mindfulness techniques have been implemented recently in like substance abuse treatment centers for PTSD, for veterans, for people with mood disorders in psychiatric hospitals, for people with chronic pain, stress, mental illness, with huge results, like very, very successful results when used with other modalities like we've talked about. So talk therapy to support what's going on that element of the lived experience, and then yoga or yoga therapy as a non-narcotic way, which is really helpful for a lot of people to relieve withdrawal symptoms if you're in substance abuse recovery, or to meet anxiety and stress if you've got a high stress job or a high stress lifestyle, or to really learn to use the body's own resources to heal itself. And the changes in the brain are just one way that we see the body healing and repairing over time with these yogic practices. And then there's a lot of research that's been coming out in the past few years as well that just show that yoga in addiction recovery and also just in life improves our mood. It like reduces the imbalanced hormone levels that a lot of people see when they come into addiction recovery, or if they're displaying any sort of mood disorder. It helps us increase our concentration. We see better sleep. We see less fatigue. We see better lifestyle habits overall when people are like slowing down and getting introspective about how they feel and what they want. And a lot of like self-empowerment and things like that come along with it. But there's a lot of data to back up. The American Addiction Center, like American Addiction Centers as a whole, has been studying this pretty extensively because they're advocating for more and more treatment centers to use holistic practices and body-based practices as part of recovery, and like holistic healing. Holistic, that word, like buzzword that you'll hear all the time now. It just means whole person, right? Because we've been addressing symptoms of issues on maybe one level of a person's being, instead of kind of getting to the root cause and addressing it physically and mentally and emotionally. And there are a lot of ways that yoga is bearing out that if you address all the levels, people get better, and they get better for real. You know what I mean? Like it's not just like a temporary fix. So that's been really fascinating to see.
So, okay, very cool. I have one last question for you. It is for, well, I have two last questions, but well, I'm trying to make sure that we end on time and we honor these busy behavioral health professionals' time. So, first question: you are in the helping profession. I would consider you a behavioral health professional. You are. That's what you do. Like you help people to overcome these like mental health, substance use, addiction challenges, right? Which, as we know, can be quite the burdensome thing on your own brain, on your own mind and body, right? Like I used to be in the health and fitness space, and I can't tell you how many personal trainers I knew who never made time to work out because they were always in the gym, and that was like the last thing they wanted to do. So it brings us to the next section of our show called Treat Yourself. So, Katie Pine, how do you treat yourself to stay centered, to stay in it, so that you don't feel overstressed and overworked?
Yes, wonderful. Well, the nice thing about being a yoga therapist is I get to share things with people that I know work, and I know they work because I use them myself. So I attract a lot of clients with similar backgrounds as myself, which is funny, and I don't think a coincidence. But I have been building up my own yoga based practice for more than 10 years, right? So I have my own routines that have just become lifestyle that I implement every day, morning and evening, and they vary based on my own schedule, right? It's not super rigid, and yoga therapy never has to be. It's meant to meet your life where you're at and be. I can. Yeah, I have a morning practice. So I have body and breath work that I do in the morning. And I have like a meditative practice that is sometimes long, but sometimes short, depending on if I'm traveling or have a lot going on work wise. So it's never a rigid, like if I don't do this whole long thing and then I'm not a good yogi. That's not ever what we want people to feel. But I have tools at my disposal that I know are helpful to me. So if I am having a big day of client work or I have something stressful going on in my personal life, I have breath tools and body work tools and like grounding practices that I know make me feel better in a short amount of time. So that is what I do with my clients, right? Based on whatever they have going on, we can build you a practice or be like, here is a tool that we've tried that we know you like that can help you re-regulate quickly. And over time, I've been able to just build up resilience in my own nervous system so that I can down-regulate more quickly than ever before. So that's really helpful. A lot of that is introspective practices like meditation and breath work that you might hear of and not really know if they work. I promise they make you feel better, but you don't have to have some long every day I'm meditating for an hour kind of practice, right? We can make it really accessible. So I have morning and evening practices that help me get ready for my day, start me off in a balanced place, and then help me down regulate before I go to bed, which has been hugely helpful for my sleep. And then in terms of just like making sure that I have good work life balance, because that's something that I advocate for in all of my clients' relationships as well. I try to spend as much time like outside of my technology as I do on my technology. A lot of like my own personal like exercise and getting out into nature and making time for my relationships and things like that is huge in making space for me to hold space for other people, right? Because if I'm grounded and centered within myself, because I'm making time to take good care of myself and to do things that I enjoy, then I'm able to hold better healing space for my clients, even just by coming to them with a balanced and regulated nervous system myself.
If you said something that was interesting to me, you're like, I try to spend as much time off of technology as I do on technology. And I was like, if I tried to do that, I would have to like sleep outside. I would have to just like as soon as work is done, just throw my phone into a lake or something, like there's no way. Like Netflix would just miss me, Hulu, all these things. So I thought that was interesting.
It's easier said than done for sure.
Katie, you're such an amazing person, such an amazing practitioner and yogi. Where can people go to learn more about you and all the awesome work that you do?
Yes, so my company is called Reconnection Yoga Therapy. It's all about reconnecting you to all the goodness, all of the wholeness, all the connection that's always been within you. So reconnectionyogatherapy.com is my website that you helped me out with, Clint. Thank you so much. Now it's beautiful. And you can find me at that handle on Instagram and on LinkedIn as well. And yes, that is where you can like book with me. You can learn more about yoga therapy. You can reach out to me with questions. I do offer free calls, like initial connection calls for people to learn more about yoga therapy, to tell you more about me, and to find out if this kind of work could help support your goals and support you wherever you're at this point in your life.
Awesome. Listen, y'all, all this anxiety, depression, addiction, substance use, all the stuff that yoga therapy can help with, it's real, but it's also more common than we think. And with the help of behavioral health professionals like you and yoga therapy teachers like Katie, it's also treatable. All of my love, and we will see you on the next episode.